We're going to switch gears now. We're going to apply the conflict perspective to health, illness, medicine, and healthcare. I hope you see how these two perspectives are different. I want to remind everyone that the conflict perspective has three assumptions: inequality, competition, and social change. In other words, the conflict perspective argues that there are haves and have-nots that are built into institutions. They're competing over scarce resources. The world does change as haves and have-nots fight over these resources, but fundamental aspects of inequality do continue to endure. Obviously, the conflict perspective wants to get rid of those fundamental aspects of inequality, but they do tend to endure. The conflict perspective asks the question, who benefits from these institutions, and how do groups that benefit from these institutions maintain their benefits? The concept that I like the most when thinking about the conflict perspective is the industries of illness and healthcare. This idea argues that there are producers of illness. These are groups of people, corporations, organizations that actually produce illness in our society. There are the consumers of illness. That would be us. We consume illness. Then there are the producers of healthcare. These are doctors, nurses, insurance agencies, things like that. And then there's the consumers of healthcare. Again, people like you and me who consume healthcare. We pay money to our insurance companies. We pay money to doctors and pharmaceutical industry. So you see it's sort of like a circle where somebody's producing illness, we consume illness, somebody produces healthcare because we're sick now, and then we consume healthcare. So what are the producers of illness? So it's going to sound silly, but I'm arguing, and sociologists argue, that alcohol, the whole alcohol industry, is a producer of illness. Alcohol is linked to obesity, diabetes, heart disease, alcoholism. Cigarettes are producers of illness. The tobacco industry produces illness. We smoke cigarettes, and lo and behold, we have emphysema, we have heart disease, and we have congestive heart failure. What about the sugar industry? This is another producer of illness. It's a corporation that's trying to sell Americans Coke, Pepsi, and all sorts of sugary beverages, candy. We have a candy holiday in our society where we celebrate candy through Halloween and Valentine's Day and Christmas. Every single holiday has a candy element. We're teaching our children to love sweet things. And lo and behold, America has obesity and diabetes epidemic going on. But it's not just food and alcohol, it's also our workplaces. Our workplaces produce illness. A lot of workplaces have horrible toxic chemicals and toxic air and environments that actually breed illness. There are injuries called repetitive motion injuries. If you work in an office all day, maybe you develop a bad back from sitting in a chair, maybe you develop carpal tunnel syndrome for typing on a keyboard. Maybe you're a butcher and you're cutting over and over and over, and you develop a repetitive motion injury, or you're surrounded by harsh chemicals and you get some sort of illness from those harsh chemicals. Even our food industry is generally plagued with toxic chemicals and pesticides that actually are pretty dangerous for the people working around them. So these are producers of illness. If you've ever been near a nail salon and you've smelled the chemicals in those environments, sociologists argue that that's where illness is coming from. It's coming from the food, the cigarettes, the alcohol, and the chemicals from all of these different workplaces. If you've ever seen a sign like this, I'm new to California. I've only lived here for 10 years, but I still feel like I'm new to California. When I see these in California, I always scratch my head and say, holy cow! The area contains chemicals known to the state of California to cause cancer and birth defects or other reproductive harm. You see them all over the place. My wife and I were drywalling our home, and the boxes that the drywall came in had these warning signs on them. It said, hey, if you breathe a lot of this stuff, it does cause cancer. So people who are installing drywall might develop an illness. And again, if it's in your home, and maybe if it gets into the air, it could cause some sort of damage to you. This is a McDonald's Happy Meal box. Chemicals known to cause cancer or birth defects or other reproductive harm may be present in foods or beverages sold or served here. Cooked potatoes that have been browned, such as French fries, hash browns, and baked potatoes, contain acrylamide, a chemical known to the state of California to cause cancer. It's in our food. So this concept of producers of illness is the idea that illness-causing facilities like factories and power plants are located in poor communities. When you want to put in some place where it's going to be causing illness, the rich people generally will say, not in my backyard. That's called a NIMBY movement, not in my backyard. And they will not allow cancer-causing or illness-causing facilities to be put in their communities. Poorer communities that have less political power as a community, they're less mobilized, they have less money to devote to get lawyers, that's where corporations put their factories and power plants. Poor people tend to work in jobs with dangerous chemicals. They're the ones who are working in the nail salons, they're the ones who are cleaning our environments with toxic chemicals, and they're the ones who are working around those things. Poor people tend to be surrounded by unhealthy food. There's a concept called food deserts. A food desert is a place where there's not a lot of healthy choices for people. I went to school at Rutgers University, and the town of New Brunswick, where Rutgers is located, had to subsidize the local supermarket to stay there. In many poor communities, the supermarket moves away, and there's no supermarket for the poor people. So the poor people in these communities generally are eating at a mom and pop store that sells 40s and Monster beverages and Twinkies. So if they want food, they're going to a place like that. Maybe they can get a gallon of milk. And what research shows is that people in poor communities are actually paying more for food than people in rich communities. People in rich communities can go to a Walmart and they can buy a gallon of milk for pretty cheap. People in real poor communities where it's a food desert are literally paying like $8 a gallon for milk because the mom and pop store is getting charged a lot of money for that milk, whereas Walmart can set the price point and say, we won't pay more than this much money for milk. And they're buying at such a large volume that they actually get those price points, whereas the mom and pop stores can't sort of demand a certain price for things like milk and bread. So poor people are paying more for food, they generally have access to less healthy food, and poor people are under a lot of stress. It's stressful not knowing how you're going to pay the bills, how you're going to pay the rent, how you're going to take care of your children. You put it all together and you have environmental racism and environmental classism, where these folks are living in a situation that breeds illness, and then they don't have insurance. You put it all together and you have the producers of illness, you have the consumers of illness, and the poor are disproportionately consuming illness. Then you have the producers of healthcare, who the poor sometimes don't have access to, and then you have the consumers of healthcare. The poor are going to public hospitals and they're having the very expensive hospital bills because they don't have insurance. How do sociologists look at illness? Well, notice we're looking at social context and situations and arguing that that causes illness. We're not focusing on biology right now. And this was mind-blowing to me when I first started to study the sociology of health and illness. We had a guest speaker come to one of my classes, and she did research on breast cancer. And she pointed out that when women go to a doctor, the doctor asks them about their bodies and their family. The doctor will say, does your mother have breast cancer? Does your aunt have breast cancer? Does your grandmother have breast cancer? Why? Because our whole society is telling us that our bodies, our biology, our genetics is the problem. That's where illness comes from. It's faulty biology, it's bad genetics. But what environmental scientists and sociologists work together to find is that certain social contexts and environments, that's actually what's creating the illness in our society. So sociologists, rather than saying we're going to go and we're going to look at your genes, we're going to look at your biology, we say we're going to focus on your institutions. We're going to focus on people with power who benefit from having the institutions treat you a certain way. And to me, this is a very different way of looking at health and illness than the biological model that we've been told our whole life. Look at biology. Notice that epidemiologists focus on who you spend time with, because that's an important factor. There is a social aspect to health and illness that often gets neglected. and doctors generally don't address it. One of the main arguments of the conflict perspective is that social problems are caused upstream, but health insurance, corporations, and governments want to fix the problem downstream. And to me, this is another one of these concepts that is a big takeaway from sociology, if you can understand it. So let me show you a picture that might help you understand this concept better. So here we have the problem over here on the left side. It's being caused upstream. We have a factory that's polluting the air in a poor community, just filling the air with toxic chemicals and causing air pollution. Downstream, we have a little boy. The little boy has started to develop asthma. So mom and dad take the child to the doctor, and the doctor says, "Oh, the child has asthma. We will give this child an inhaler." Notice the problem is caused upstream by the factory. But what we do is we problematize the child. The child is the problem. Let's fix the child. And the doctors and the corporations and the insurance companies are all in agreement on this. Let's fix that kid. Let's not worry about the problem that's being caused upstream. I'd like to offer you one other example of this issue. Imagine instead of having a factory that's polluting the air on the left-hand side of the screen, instead it was magazines showing skinny women who are popular and happy. Imagine we had movies that celebrated the beauty of skinny women. Imagine you're with your family and your sister, she's skinnier than you, and everyone's telling you how beautiful your sister is. We live in a society where everyone is sort of saying that beauty is about being skinny. Women, their beauty is about being skinny. Then we have downstream a woman who develops bulimia or anorexia. What do? We take that young woman, we bring her to a doctor, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a group, and they address her as the problem. She needs to be fixed. She needs to develop some way of dealing with that anorexia and bulimia and deal with her problem. Sociologists say she is not the problem. The problem is the toxic culture that is over and over telling us that beauty is about being skinny. And that's what beauty is. You're going to be happy and popular, and you're going to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend or whatever it is. You're going to live a good life if you are skinny. Sociologists say that's the problem, that culture, rather than looking at that individual. And the conflict perspective says, think about it. The magazines are making money. The TV shows are making money. The movies are making money. The actresses are making money. All the people who are skinny like this message that they are the best. All of these forces are pushing, creating this environment, and here we have the individual downstream who is being impacted by that culture, and we say they're the problem. Let's give them an inhaler. Let's give them a therapist. Let's fix them, not the society. The problem is being caused upstream, but we want to fix it downstream.